Have you ever looked at a stranger and wondered if a single interaction could rewrite your destiny? For Olivia Jenkins, a 24-year-old waitress drowning in debt, covering a declined credit card for a frail old man, seemed like just another exhausting Tuesday night. She thought she was saving a lonely grandfather from embarrassment. She didn't know the man sitting at booth 4 was Salvatore Conti, the ruthlessly cunning boss of the most feared crime syndicate on the East Coast. And she definitely didn't know that 3 weeks later, he'd be assassinated, leaving his entire blood-soaked billion-dollar empire to her. This isn't just a story about luck. It's a terrifying descent into a world where loyalty is bought with blood. A mafia prince wants her dead, and one act of kindness might just cost Olivia her life. The Brass Bell was the kind of upscale Manhattan steakhouse where the lighting was kept intentionally dim so the patrons wouldn't have to look too closely at the faces of the people they were conducting illicit business with. It smelled of aged leather, charred ribeye, and the sharp, metallic tang of expensive gin. For Olivia Jenkins, it just smelled like exhaustion. It was a rainy Tuesday night in late November. Olivia's uniform, a stiff white button-down, and a suffocating black pencil skirt, felt like a second skin she was desperate to shed. Her feet ached, a deep, throbbing pain that radiated up to her knees, the result of pulling her third double shift of the week. She had to. The final medical bills from her late mother's aggressive battle with pancreatic cancer had arrived that morning, and the bright red past due stamped across the envelope was practically burned into her retinas. She was 24, living in a shoebox apartment in Queens, and $60,000 in debt. At 10:15 p.m., 15 minutes before the kitchen closed, the heavy mahogany doors of the Brass Bell pushed open. The man who walked in didn't look like the usual Wall Street executives or trust fund kids that frequented the establishment. He was elderly, perhaps in his late 70s, wearing a tailored but soaked charcoal wool trench coat. His silver hair was slicked back, plastered to his skull by the rain. He walked with a slight limp, leaning heavily on a black cane with a silver handle. There was a quiet dignity about him, but also a profound, echoing exhaustion that Olivia recognized instantly. It was the same look her mother had in her final weeks. David Harrington, the restaurant's notoriously snobbish floor manager, immediately sneered from his post at the hostess stand. He made no move to seat the man, intentionally looking away. Olivia sighed, grabbing a leather-bound menu. She walked to the front. "Table for one, sir?" The old man turned his gaze to her. His eyes were dark, incredibly sharp, and carried a weight that made Olivia inexplicably want to stand up straighter. "Just a quiet booth in the back, if you would be so kind," he rasped. His voice was gravelly, a thick New York accent laced with something older and European. "Right this way." Olivia seated him at booth 4, an isolated corner shielded by a frosted glass partition. He didn't look at the menu. He ordered a bone-in veal chop, medium rare, and a bottle of 1996 Giacomo Conterno Barolo. Olivia blinked. That particular bottle of wine was $350 alone. Throughout the next hour, Olivia checked on him. He ate slowly, savoring every bite, staring out the rain-streaked window into the neon-lit streets of Manhattan. He barely touched the wine, pouring only half a glass and simply smelling it, as if the aroma alone brought back a lifetime of memories. At 11:30 p.m., Olivia dropped the leather checkbook on the table. "Whenever you're ready, sir. No rush." The bill was $480 after tax. 10 minutes later, the old man motioned her over. He had slipped a sleek, black American Express card into the fold. Olivia took it to the POS terminal at the bar, swiped it, and waited. "Declined." Olivia frowned. She wiped the magnetic strip on her apron and tried again. "Declined. Fraud alert. Hold card. Problem, Olivia?" David Harrington materialized behind her, smelling of overpowering peppermint and cheap cologne. He looked at the screen, and a cruel, triumphant smile spread across his face. "I knew it." The old bum walked in looking like a drowned rat. "He's trying to pull a dine and dash." "David, he's an old man," Olivia whispered, stepping between the manager and the terminal. "Maybe the magnetic strip is just worn out. Let me go ask him for another card." "No," David snapped, grabbing the checkbook from her hand. "I'm handling this." Olivia followed David back to booth 4, her stomach tying itself in knots. "Sir," David announced, his voice booming across the now empty restaurant, "your card was declined and flagged for fraud. I need another form of payment, or I'm calling the NYPD right now." The old man didn't flinch. He slowly reached into the breast pocket of his suit jacket, his weathered fingers patting the lining. A flicker of genuine confusion, followed by a dark, dangerous shadow, crossed his face. "It seems," he said quietly, "that my accounts have been unexpectedly frozen, and I do not carry cash." "Figures," David spat. He pulled his walkie-talkie from his belt. "Hey, security. Lock the front doors. We've got a thief." "Wait," Olivia blurted out. Both men looked at her. The old man's eyes were unreadable, though his jaw tightened. To a proud man, public humiliation was a fate worse than death. Olivia remembered her grandfather, standing in a grocery store checkout line, weeping silently when he couldn't afford his prescriptions. The memory felt like a physical punch to her chest. "I'll cover it," Olivia said, her voice shaking slightly. David laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You? Jenkins, you begged me for an advance on your tips yesterday. This is $500. "I have my debit card," Olivia said, pulling her worn blue Chase card from her apron. It was her rent money. It was her grocery money for the next 2 weeks. It was a catastrophic financial decision, but looking at the old man's humiliated, proud face, she couldn't stop herself. She walked to the terminal, David following her, muttering about her stupidity. She inserted her card. She typed in her PIN. She closed her eyes and prayed the transaction would go through. Approved. She printed the merchant copy, her hands trembling as she realized she now had exactly $14 left in her checking account. She walked back to booth 4 and handed the old man his black American Express card, sliding it across the table. "You're all set, sir," she said softly, offering a warm, reassuring smile. "It happens to the best of us." David scoffed and walked away to the back office. The old man looked at the receipt, then at Olivia. The silence stretched between them, heavy and profound. He didn't offer to pay her back. He didn't ask for her phone number to send a check. Instead, he reached out and gently laid his hand over hers. His skin was cold, his grip surprisingly strong. "What is your name, child?" he asked. "Olivia. Olivia Jenkins." "Olivia," he repeated, tasting the syllables. "You have a good heart. In my world, a good heart is a rare liability, but tonight it is a blessing." He slowly stood up, leaning on his silver-handled cane. He buttoned his damp trench coat. Without another word, he walked out of the brass bell, disappearing into the torrential downpour of the Manhattan night. Olivia stared at the empty booth, the $350 bottle of Barolo practically untouched. She let out a long, shaky breath, wondering how she was going to survive the rest of the month. She thought she would never see him again. She thought it was just a $480 mistake. She was wrong. 3 weeks later, Olivia was scraping dried ketchup off a plate when her world shattered. She had managed to avoid eviction by pawning her mother's gold locket and pleading with her landlord. She was exhausted, living on instant ramen, and trying desperately not to regret the night she played savior to a stranger. It was a slow Thursday afternoon. The brass bell was empty save for the bartender, Luis, who was wiping down the counter with one eye on the flat-screen TV mounted above the liquor shelf. "Hey, Olivia," Luis called out. "Get a load of this. Big mob hit over in New Jersey last night." Olivia wiped her hands on a towel and walked over, barely interested. But as her eyes fell on the screen, the air left her lungs. The news anchor's voice droned on over helicopter footage of a sprawling, heavily fortified mansion surrounded by police tape. Authorities have confirmed that Salvatore Conti, 78, the reputed head of the Conti crime family, was found assassinated in his private study late last night. Conti, who has managed to evade federal prosecution for decades, leaves behind a massive, multi-billion-dollar empire of real estate developments, shipping companies, and reputed illicit operations. A photograph flashed on the screen. It was the man from booth 4. He looked sharper in the photo, more imposing, wearing a tailored 3-piece suit, his silver hair immaculate, resting his hands on the familiar silver-handled cane. Olivia stumbled backward, her hip hitting a bar stool. Salvatore Conti, a mafia boss. The man whose dinner she had paid for was an underworld kingpin. The realization that she had stood between a ruthless mobster and a petty, loud-mouthed restaurant manager made her blood run cold. If David had laid a hand on him— "Olivia, you good?" Luis asked, noticing her pale face. Before she could answer, The heavy oak doors of the restaurant pushed open. A man walked in. He wasn't a customer. He moved with the predatory grace of a shark, wearing a flawless charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than Olivia made in a year. He carried a sleek, leather briefcase. He scanned the room, his eyes locking onto Olivia immediately. He walked straight toward her. Luis discreetly slid a hand under the bar toward the panic button. "Olivia Jenkins?" the man asked. His voice was smooth, professional, and entirely devoid of warmth. "Yes," Olivia whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "My name is Arthur Sterling. I am the senior partner at Sterling, Vance, and Hughes. We represent the estate of the late Salvatore Conti." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with crimson wax. He held it out to her. "You are required to attend the reading of Mr. Conti's last will and testament tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Olivia stared at the envelope as if it were a live grenade. There must be a mistake. I just served him dinner once. I don't know him." "Mr. Conti was not a man who made mistakes, Miss Jenkins," Sterling replied smoothly. "A car will be waiting outside your apartment building in Queens at 8 a.m. sharp. I strongly advise you to be in it. The people you will be meeting tomorrow do not appreciate tardiness." He placed the envelope on the bar, turned on his heel, and walked out. The next morning, Olivia sat trembling in the back of a bulletproof Mercedes Maybach as it wound its way up a private, heavily wooded road in Alpine, New Jersey. She was wearing her best dress, a simple navy blue sheath dress she usually reserved for funerals, but she felt entirely inadequate. The estate was a fortress. Wrought iron gates swung open, revealing a massive stone mansion that looked like a European castle transplanted into the American suburbs. Men in dark suits with visible earpieces and bulging jackets patrolled the perimeter. Olivia was escorted by a silent, broad-shouldered guard through a grand foyer dripping with crystal chandeliers, down a long hallway lined with classical art, and into a breathtaking mahogany-paneled library. The air in the room was thick with tension and the smell of expensive cigar smoke. Sitting behind a massive desk was Arthur Sterling, organizing a stack of legal documents. But it was the two men occupying the leather sofas in the center of the room that made Olivia's breath hitch. To the left sat a man in his early 40s. He wore a flashy maroon suit, his fingers adorned with heavy gold rings. He was pacing like a caged tiger, chewing aggressively on an unlit cigar. This was Lorenzo Conti, Salvatore's biological son. He radiated volatility, his dark eyes darting around the room with paranoid intensity. To the right, leaning casually against the window frame, was a younger man, perhaps in his early 30s. He wore a simple black suit, no tie. His dark hair was slightly longer, falling over intense, icy blue eyes. A thin, pale scar cut across his sharp jawline. He was perfectly still, exuding a quiet, lethal danger that was far more terrifying than Lorenzo's pacing. This, Olivia would later learn, was Dominic Rossi, Salvatore's godson, his deadliest enforcer, and the heir apparent to the streets. When Olivia entered, the room went dead silent. Lorenzo stopped pacing. He looked Olivia up and down, his lip curling into a sneer. "Who the hell is this? Sterling, is this one of the maids? Get her out of here." "Miss Jenkins is a named beneficiary, Lorenzo," Sterling said calmly, adjusting his glasses. "Take a seat, Miss Jenkins." Olivia sat on the edge of a velvet chair, her knees pressed tightly together. She could feel Dominic Rossi's icy blue eyes burning into the side of her head. He was analyzing her, stripping away her defenses with a single look. "A beneficiary?" Lorenzo spat, slamming his hand on a side table. "My father was losing his mind in the end. Who is she? One of his street corner charity cases?" "If you will sit down, Lorenzo, we can begin," Sterling commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. Grumbling, Lorenzo threw himself onto the sofa. Sterling cleared his throat and opened the thick leather binder. He read through the legalese, the distribution of cash accounts, the minor properties. Lorenzo was given control of the syndicate's street-level operations and a sum of $50 million in offshore accounts. Dominic Rossi was bequeathed the European distribution networks and full ownership of the family's armory and security firms. And finally, Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave, causing the room to hold its breath, regarding the crown jewel of the estate. The 80% controlling stake in Conti Enterprises, the legitimate holding company, overseeing $12 billion in real estate, Manhattan skyscrapers, and global shipping ports, as well as the deed to this alpine estate. Sterling looked up, his eyes meeting Olivia's. I leave entirely and irrevocably to Miss Olivia Jenkins. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the terrifying calm before a devastating storm. Olivia stopped breathing. $12 billion? A holding company? What? Lorenzo whispered, his voice cracking. The blood drained from his face, only to return in a violent, furious purple flush. He leaped from the sofa, knocking a crystal decanter to the floor, where it shattered into 100 pieces. What did you just say? The documents are ironclad, Lorenzo, Sterling said, unfazed. Your father executed this change to his will exactly 2.5 weeks ago. Miss Jenkins is now the majority shareholder and head of Conti Enterprises. Lorenzo lunged toward Olivia, his face twisted in pure, unadulterated rage. You bitch! I don't know how you conned my father, but I will gut you right here in this. Before Lorenzo could take a third step, a shadow moved across the room faster than Olivia could comprehend. Dominic Rossi was suddenly standing between Olivia and Lorenzo. He hadn't drawn a weapon, but his presence was a physical wall. He grabbed Lorenzo by the lapels of his flashy maroon suit, stopping the older man dead in his tracks. Touch her, Dominic said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that sent shivers down Olivia's spine. And I'll break your neck before you hit the floor. The old man made his choice. Lorenzo stared at Dominic, chest heaving, spittle flying from his lips. She's a nobody, Dom. She's stealing our legacy. Dominic slowly released Lorenzo, smoothing out the man's lapels with a terrifyingly calm gesture. Then, he turned to face Olivia. His icy blue eyes locked onto hers. He leaned in, so close she could smell the bergamot and gun oil on his skin. She's not a nobody anymore, Dominic murmured, his gaze dropping to her trembling hands before meeting her eyes again. She's the boss now, and that means she has a target on her back the size of Manhattan. He tilted his head, a dark, dangerous smirk playing on his lips. Welcome to the family, Principessa. Try to survive the weekend. The mahogany doors of the library slammed shut behind Lorenzo, leaving a vibrating silence in his wake. Olivia sat frozen in the velvet chair, her fingernails biting so deeply into her palms that they drew blood. I don't want it, she blurted out, her voice barely a squeak. She looked frantically between Arthur Sterling and Dominic Rossi. Take it back. Give it to Lorenzo. I just want to go home to Queens. I have a double shift at the restaurant tomorrow. Arthur Sterling calmly closed the thick leather binder. Miss Jenkins, you cannot simply decline. If you renounce your shares, the contingency clause states the assets dissolve into a trust heavily restricted by federal oversight, which will instantly trigger a massive DOJ investigation into the family. Lorenzo would lose everything. So? Olivia cried, standing up. Let him lose it. Dominic stepped forward, the heels of his Italian leather shoes clicking softly against the hardwood floor. He was looking at her, not with pity, but with a cold, analytical calculation. If you renounce the shares, Olivia, Lorenzo won't just be poor, he'll be exposed, Dominic said, his voice a dark, resonant baritone. And in our world, exposed men tie up loose ends. You are the biggest loose end of his life. If you walk out of here without the protection of the boss's title, you won't make it to your double shift tomorrow. You'll be found at the bottom of the East River. Olivia's knees buckled. Dominic caught her by the elbow before she hit the floor. His grip was iron tight but surprisingly gentle. Salvatore saw something in you, Dominic continued, his icy blue eyes searching her face. He spent his whole life surrounded by jackals who only wanted his money. Then he met a girl who gave up her last dollar for a stranger she thought was in trouble. He didn't give you an empire, Olivia. He gave you a loaded weapon. Now you have to learn how to fire it. Within an hour, Olivia was back in the bulletproof Maybach, but this time, Dominic was sitting across from her. They were heading to her apartment in Queens to pack her essentials. She wasn't allowed to live there anymore. The Alpine estate was now her gilded fortress. When the convoy of black SUVs pulled up to her crumbling brick apartment building, the contrast was violently absurd. Dominic followed her up the narrow, urine-scented stairwell to the 4th floor. Inside her tiny studio, Dominic stood near the door, taking in the peeling wallpaper, the stack of past-due medical bills on the wobbly kitchen table, and the half-empty pantry of instant ramen. His jaw tightened. He walked over to the table and picked up the red-stamped hospital bill for her late mother. $60,000, Dominic read aloud, his tone unreadable. I was paying it off, Olivia said defensively, tossing a handful of clothes into a duffel bag. You're a billionaire now, Olivia. This debt is pocket change. Dominic set the paper down and turned to face her. But money doesn't buy survival. If you're going to live through the month, you need to understand the rules of the reality you just stepped into. He held up his hand, ticking off points on his fingers. Asterisk. Trust no one but me. Arthur Sterling is a lawyer. He follows the paper, not the person. Lorenzo is a rabid dog. The capos underneath him will smile at you while holding a knife to your back. I am bound by a blood oath to Salvatore to protect the head of this family. That is now you. Asterisk. Never show fear in public. Sharks smell blood. If the men working in Conti Enterprises think you are a weak, terrified waitress, they will dismantle you in the boardroom before Lorenzo even gets a chance to shoot you. Asterisk. Own the space. You do not apologize for existing anymore. You are the majority shareholder of a $12 billion syndicate. Act like it. Olivia swallowed hard, zipping up her cheap duffel bag. She looked around the tiny apartment that had been her prison of poverty for 3 years. She was trading one kind of survival for another. Okay, Olivia whispered, her chin trembling slightly before she forced it up. What's our first move? A faint, approving smirk ghosted across Dominic's face. Tomorrow, you walk into Conti Enterprises and take your father's, Salvatore's chair. The Conti Enterprises headquarters was a gleaming, 60-story tower of glass and steel in the heart of Manhattan's financial district. It was the legitimate face of a very illegitimate empire, housing international shipping logistics, real estate portfolios, and construction firms. At 9 a.m. on Monday, Olivia stepped out of the Maybach. She was unrecognizable. Gone was the stained white button-down and sensible shoes. Under Dominic's strict orders and his corporate black card, she was dressed in a razor-sharp, tailored black Armani suit, her hair pulled back into a sleek, severe chignon. A pair of Christian Louboutin heels clicked sharply against the pavement. She looked powerful, expensive, and untouchable. Her stomach, however, was churning with nausea. Dominic flanked her right side, wearing a custom navy suit that hid the tactical shoulder holster beneath his jacket. 3 massive security guards trailed closely behind them. Head up, shoulders back. Breathe, Dominic murmured near her ear as they pushed through the revolving glass doors. The sprawling marble lobby went dead silent. Executives in $1,000 suits stopped in their tracks. Security personnel stiffened. Rumors of Salvatore's mysterious heir had dominated the weekend news cycle, but no one expected her. Olivia marched to the private, biometric-locked elevator. Dominic scanned his thumbprint, and the doors slid open. They rode in silence to the 60th floor, the executive penthouse. When they entered the massive, glass-walled boardroom, the air conditioning felt instantly freezing. Sitting around the long mahogany table were 12 men, and at the very head of the table, leaning back in the plush leather chair that belonged to the CEO, sat Lorenzo Conti. Lorenzo smiled, a venomous, bared teeth expression. Ah, the waitress has arrived. Can you fetch me a coffee, sweetheart? Black, 2 sugars. A few of the board members chuckled nervously. Olivia froze. Her instinct was to shrink back, to apologize, to bolt for the elevator. But she felt the heat of Dominic's presence just an inch behind her. Never show fear. Own the space. Olivia stepped forward, her heels echoing like gunshots in the quiet room. She walked directly to the head of the table. She looked down at Lorenzo, letting the silence stretch until his arrogant smile began to falter. You're in my chair, Lorenzo, Olivia said. Her voice was steady, cold, and entirely foreign to her own ears. Lorenzo's eyes flashed with fury. He stood up slowly, towering over her. You have paper, little girl. I have the streets. You think a signature makes you a boss? I think 80% controlling interest makes me your boss, Olivia replied, not breaking eye contact. If you want to keep your $50 million allowance, I suggest you find another seat, or find another building. The boardroom collectively held its breath. Lorenzo stared at her, his jaw clenching so hard Olivia thought his teeth might shatter. Finally, he let out a harsh laugh, stepped aside, and dropped into the chair to the right. Olivia sat down at the head of the table. Her hands were shaking violently, so she hid them beneath the mahogany wood. She had won the first battle. But Lorenzo wasn't a man who played by boardroom rules. An hour later, the meeting concluded. Olivia had barely spoken, letting Arthur Sterling handle the financial transitions, but her presence alone was a statement. As she and Dominic descended in the private elevator to the underground parking garage, she let out a massive breath, slumping against the mirrored wall. "You did good, Principessa," Dominic said softly. It was the first compliment he had given her. "I thought I was going to throw up," Olivia admitted, managing a weak smile. The elevator doors chimed and slid open to the dimly lit concrete expanse of the VIP garage level. Their armored SUV was waiting 30 yards away. "Let's get you home," Dominic said, stepping out first. They had made it exactly 10 yards when the squeal of burning rubber echoed through the cavernous space. A black, unmarked panel van suddenly accelerated from behind a concrete pillar, hurtling directly toward them. The side door of the van violently slid open, revealing two men wearing tactical masks and holding fully automatic submachine guns. "Get down!" Dominic roared. Before Olivia could process the danger, Dominic tackled her. They hit the hard concrete just as a deafening barrage of gunfire erupted. The air was instantly filled with the sharp stench of cordite, the shattering of car windows, and the terrifying, high-pitched ricochet of bullets tearing into the concrete pillars around them. Olivia screamed, covering her ears as shattered glass rained down on her back. Dominic covered her completely with his body, a human shield of solid muscle. He didn't hesitate. With his left arm pinning Olivia down, his right hand blurred to his jacket. He drew a sleek, matte black Sig Sauer P-226 and returned fire with terrifying, mechanical precision. Bang, bang, bang. One of the masked men in the van jerked backward, dropping his weapon as a dark red mist sprayed the interior of the vehicle. The driver panicked, slamming on the gas. The van careened wildly, scraping against a parked Tesla before peeling out of the garage toward the exit ramp, leaving a cloud of grey tire smoke in its wake. The echoes of gunfire slowly faded, replaced by the frantic shouting of Conti Enterprises security guards rushing down the stairwells. Olivia lay on the cold concrete, her ears ringing, her lungs gasping for air. Her expensive Armani suit was torn at the knee, and her hands were scraped and bleeding. Dominic slowly pushed himself up, his eyes frantically scanning her face, his hands running over her arms and shoulders to check for bullet wounds. "Olivia, Olivia, look at me. Are you hit?" "No," she gasped, her whole body shaking violently. "No, I'm okay." Dominic's icy blue eyes were entirely black with rage. He looked toward the exit ramp where the van had disappeared, his jaw set in a lethal line. Lorenzo didn't even wait a day. Olivia sat up, brushing the shattered glass off her lap. The terrified, overwhelmed waitress from Queens was gone, left somewhere on the concrete floor amidst the shell casings. She looked at the blood on her hands, then up at Dominic. A cold, hard realization settled over her like a heavy winter coat. "He wants to kill me," Olivia whispered, her voice devoid of panic. It was pure, distilled clarity. "Yes," Dominic said grimly. Olivia slowly pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the stinging pain in her knees. She looked at the bullet-riddled concrete, and then she looked at Dominic Rossi, the deadliest man in New York, who was now bound by blood to serve her. "Then we kill him first." The armored Maybach tore up the Palisades Interstate Parkway, breaking every speed limit as it sped back toward the fortified Alpine estate. Inside the cabin, the silence was deafening, broken only by Olivia's ragged breathing and the harsh, metallic click of Dominic reloading his Sig Sauer. Olivia stared at her hands. They were still coated in the fine grey dust of pulverized concrete and a few drops of her own blood from a scraped palm. She had survived her first assassination attempt. The reality of it was settling into her bones like ice. "You're bleeding," Olivia whispered, finally breaking the silence. She pointed a shaking finger at Dominic's left shoulder. His custom navy suit jacket was torn, the dark fabric glistening with a steady seep of crimson. A stray bullet had grazed him when he threw himself over her in the garage. Dominic barely glanced at it. "It's a scratch, Principessa." The Kevlar caught the worst of the impact. "The priority is getting you behind the gates." "It's not a scratch, Dominic," she snapped, a sudden flare of authority cutting through her panic. "You're bleeding on the leather." For a fraction of a second, Dominic's icy blue eyes widened in surprise before a dark, genuine smirk touched his lips. "Yes, boss." The moment the heavy iron gates of the estate clanged shut behind them, the property swarmed with heavily armed guards. Dominic ordered a total lockdown. No one in, no one out, without his explicit visual confirmation. Inside the cavernous kitchen, Olivia refused the estate doctor's offer of a sedative. Instead, she demanded a first aid kit, while Arthur Sterling paced the hallway outside, frantically making calls to trusted contacts within the NYPD to sweep the parking garage incident under the rug. Olivia ordered Dominic to sit on one of the Marble Island stools and take his jacket off. He hesitated, his jaw tight, but slowly slid the ruined blazer and his ruined, blood-soaked dress shirt off his broad shoulders. Olivia's breath hitched. Dominic's torso was a map of violence. Pale, jagged scars crisscrossed his ribs and abdomen, souvenirs of a lifetime spent enforcing Salvatore Conti's will. The bullet graze on his shoulder was deep and ugly, but thankfully, not life-threatening. With trembling hands, Olivia soaked a cotton pad in antiseptic. "This is going to sting." "I've had worse," Dominic muttered, staring straight ahead. As she gently dabbed the wound, the proximity between them shifted the air in the room. He smelled of adrenaline, expensive cologne, and gunpowder. She could feel the intense, coiled heat radiating from his skin. Every muscle in his back was rigid, prepared for an attack that wasn't coming. "Why did you do it?" Olivia asked softly, taping a gauze pad tightly over the gash. "Why jump over me? Lorenzo could have killed us both." Dominic turned his head, his face inches from hers. The icy blue of his eyes was softer now, searching her face with a strange, heavy intensity. "Because my life belongs to the family, and you are the family. If you die, Lorenzo burns Salvatore's legacy to the ground. I won't let that happen. Even if it means taking a bullet for a waitress from Queens." Dominic reached up, his large, calloused hand gently wrapping around her wrist, stopping her from pulling away. "You haven't been a waitress since the moment you paid that bill, Olivia. You're a survivor, and you're starting to realize it." He let go of her wrist, the sudden absence of his touch leaving her skin cold. He stood up, wincing slightly as his shoulder pulled. "Sterling is waiting. We need to hit Lorenzo back, and we need to do it by sunrise." 10 minutes later, Olivia, Dominic, and Arthur Sterling were gathered in the mahogany-paneled library. The scent of cigar smoke from the reading of the will still lingered. "If we send a hit squad after Lorenzo, it violates the rules of the commission," Dominic explained, leaning over a sprawling blueprint of the city's shipping ports. "The other mafia families in New York tolerate the Contis because we keep the peace and we keep the money flowing. An internal bloodbath brings the feds. The feds freeze the money. The other bosses will back Lorenzo just to end the chaos. Then we don't use bullets," Olivia said, her voice eerily calm. Both men looked at her. Olivia walked over to Salvatore's massive desk and sat down in the leather chair. She looked at Arthur Sterling. "Arthur, Lorenzo's $50 million allowance and his street operations. How does he wash that money?" Sterling adjusted his glasses, clearly taken aback by her sudden command of the room. "Through Conti Enterprises, Miss Jenkins. Specifically, our Brooklyn Shipyard Logistics Division. He uses our legitimate shipping containers to move illegal weapons and narcotics. The clean corporate money hides the dirty street money." "And as the majority shareholder, who controls the corporate compliance and auditing divisions of Conti Enterprises?" Olivia asked. A slow, terrifying realization dawned on Dominic's face. He let out a low whistle. "You do," Sterling said, a rare smile breaking his professional veneer. "Perfect," Olivia said, her eyes flashing with a dangerous cold fire. "Arthur, I want you to issue an immediate, massive internal corporate audit of the Brooklyn shipyard. Shut down all logistics. Freeze every container pending a federal compliance review. Cancel Lorenzo's corporate credit lines. Lock him out of the company servers. Don't fire a single bullet." Olivia leaned forward, interlacing her fingers. "Let's see how tough Lorenzo is when he can't pay his men, can't move his product, and his credit card is declined." In less than 48 hours, Lorenzo Conti's empire began to suffocate. Olivia's corporate guillotine fell with ruthless efficiency. By freezing the Brooklyn shipyards under the guise of an internal audit, she successfully trapped $60 million worth of Lorenzo's illegal inventory inside legitimate Conti Enterprises shipping crates. When Lorenzo's street captains went to withdraw their weekly cash payoffs, their accounts were locked. Without money, Loyalty in the underworld evaporates overnight. Olivia spent those 2 days locked in the Alpine estate, running the $12 billion empire through Arthur Sterling, while Dominic fortified the grounds. The tension inside the mansion was palpable. Olivia was no longer just surviving, she was hunting, and Dominic was watching her evolution with a mixture of dark pride and terrifying fascination. On the evening of the 3rd day, the secure landline on Salvatore's desk rang. Dominic answered it. He listened for 10 seconds, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. He hung up and looked at Olivia, who was curled up on the leather sofa, reviewing a stack of legitimate real estate acquisitions. "That was the Lucchese family underboss," Dominic said, his voice grim. "Lorenzo has called for a sit-down. Tonight, at the neutral ground of the old Roosevelt Hotel ballroom, the heads of the 5 families are attending." Olivia lowered her files. "A sit-down?" "A tribunal," Dominic explained, walking over to her. "Lorenzo is hemorrhaging cash and respect. He can't kill you with a hit squad without risking an all-out war, so he's going to the commission. He's going to argue that Salvatore was senile, that you are an illegitimate civilian, and that the other bosses should grant him permission to take the family back by force." Olivia felt a cold spike of fear. "What happens if they agree with him? Then I have to kill every single person in that ballroom to get you out alive," Dominic said, deadpan. "Olivia, you have to convince 5 of the most ruthless, misogynistic, cold-blooded murderers in America that a 24-year-old woman should run the most powerful syndicate on the East Coast. If you show even a fraction of weakness, Lorenzo will cut your throat himself." At midnight, Olivia walked into the abandoned, dusty grandeur of the Roosevelt Hotel ballroom. She wore a tailored blood-red pantsuit, a deliberate, aggressive departure from her corporate black. She looked like a queen stepping onto a battlefield. Dominic walked half a step behind her right shoulder, carrying a suppressed weapon under his coat, his eyes scanning the shadows. A heavy circular table sat in the center of the cavernous room, illuminated by a single, harsh chandelier. Sitting around it were 4 elderly men, reeking of power, expensive cigars, and old blood. Lorenzo Conti was already there, pacing furiously behind an empty chair. When Olivia approached, the bosses stopped murmuring. They looked at her with open disdain. "This is a joke," Lorenzo spat, pointing a trembling finger at Olivia. "Look at her. You're letting a waitress waste our time, Don Lucchese. Give me the vote. Let me put a bullet in her and restore the Conti name." Don Lucchese, a terrifyingly quiet man in his 80s, raised a hand. Lorenzo instantly snapped his mouth shut. Lucchese turned his rheumy, reptilian eyes to Olivia. "Salvatore was my friend," Lucchese croaked. "But he was an old man. The mind rots. Why should we respect a piece of paper over his own flesh and blood, little girl? Lorenzo is a made man. You are nothing." Olivia didn't sit down. She placed her hands flat on the dusty table and leaned in, locking eyes with Lucchese. She channeled every ounce of exhaustion, debt, and fear she had ever felt, and forged it into pure, unyielding iron. "I am the majority shareholder of Conti Enterprises," Olivia said, her voice ringing out clearly in the empty ballroom. "Under Lorenzo's sloppy management, this syndicate lost 14% of its net revenue to federal seizures last year. He leaves a trail of blood and noise wherever he goes. Noise brings the FBI." She pulled a folded document from her jacket and tossed it onto the center of the table. "That is a legally binding logistics contract. In the last 48 hours, I restructured the Brooklyn shipyards by integrating your illicit shipping lines with my newly acquired, perfectly legal overseas pharmaceutical exports. I can guarantee a 22% increase in your profit margins, completely invisible to the feds. Washed, dried, and deposited." The bosses stared at the paper. Don Lucchese slowly picked it up, adjusting his reading glasses. "I am not a gangster," Olivia continued, her eyes sweeping over the men. "I am a businesswoman. Lorenzo wants to play with guns and stroke his own ego. I want to make you all billions of dollars in perfect, boring silence. Back him, and you get a war that drains your coffers. Back me, and you all get richer by Friday." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Lorenzo's face had drained of all color. He looked from Lucchese to the other bosses, realizing with dawning horror that they were actually reading the contract. Greed, in the end, always trumped tradition. Don Lucchese folded the paper and slipped it into his breast pocket. He looked up at Olivia, and a slow, terrifying smile cracked his weathered face. "The girl makes a compelling argument," Lucchese rasped. He looked at Lorenzo. "The commission recognizes Olivia Jenkins as the legitimate head of the Conti family. Lorenzo, you are out. If you move against her, you move against all of us." "You can't do this," Lorenzo screamed, lunging forward. Before Lorenzo could even draw his weapon, Dominic's gun was out. The muzzle pressed hard against the center of Lorenzo's forehead. The metal click of the hammer, cocking, echoed through the room. "Walk away, Lorenzo," Dominic whispered, his voice a lethal promise. "Before I ruin this nice carpet." Lorenzo froze, shaking with impotent rage. He looked at Olivia, his eyes filled with a psychotic hatred. "This isn't over, bitch. I'll burn you alive." He spun on his heel and stormed out of the ballroom, his footsteps echoing into the dark. An hour later, back at the Alpine estate, the adrenaline crash hit Olivia like a freight train. She stood in the center of Salvatore's library, the heavy oak doors shut and locked. The reality of what she had just done, standing up to the bosses of the 5 families and winning, was tearing through her nervous system. She couldn't stop shaking. Dominic poured 2 glasses of scotch from the crystal decanter and walked over. He handed her one. She downed it in a single, fiery swallow, gasping as the alcohol burned its way to her stomach. Dominic set his glass down. He looked at her, his icy blue eyes completely stripped of their usual guarded composure. He didn't see a boss right now. He saw the woman beneath the armor. "You were incredible tonight," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a low, rough murmur. "I was terrified," Olivia breathed, looking up at him. "You didn't show it." Dominic stepped closer, entirely violating his self-imposed professional distance. The heat radiating off him was intoxicating. "You owned them, Olivia. Salvatore was right. You have the iron in you." Olivia looked up into his eyes, reading the dangerous, undeniable hunger simmering just beneath the surface. For 3 weeks, he had been her shadow, her shield, her only lifeline in a world of monsters. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. Dominic raised a hand, his rough knuckles lightly grazing her jawline. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core. "Olivia, I am a violent, broken man. I kill for a living. You shouldn't look at me like that." "Like what?" she challenged, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Like I'm someone worth saving," he groaned. He didn't give her a chance to reply. Dominic's hands tangled in her hair, and he pulled her flush against his chest, crashing his mouth down onto hers. The kiss was explosive, born of adrenaline, danger, and weeks of agonizing tension. Olivia gasped against his lips, dropping her empty glass to the thick Persian rug as her arms wrapped fiercely around his neck. Dominic backed her up until her spine hit the edge of the mahogany desk, his hands possessively gripping her waist, pulling her impossibly closer. For the first time in her life, Olivia didn't feel like she was drowning. She felt like she was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of the most dangerous man in New York. But out in the dark city, Lorenzo Conti was not a man who accepted defeat. He was already making a phone call that would turn Olivia's new empire into a war zone. The kiss was a collision of terror and desire, a desperate anchoring in a world that had spun entirely out of control. Olivia clung to Dominic's broad shoulders, the taste of scotch and adrenaline sharp on her tongue. For a fleeting, beautiful second, the crushing weight of the $12 billion empire vanished. Then, the Alpine estate's perimeter alarms began to scream. It wasn't a standard security chime. It was a deafening, high-pitched siren that vibrated through the floorboards of the mahogany library. Flashing red strobe lights instantly bathed the grounds outside the massive windows in a hellish, pulsing glow. Dominic broke the kiss instantly. The intoxicating heat in his icy blue eyes vanished, replaced by the terrifying, mechanical emptiness of a professional killer. He shoved Olivia behind the solid oak mass of Salvatore's desk and drew his Sig Sauer in a single, fluid motion. "The front gates are breached," Dominic barked into his wrist microphone, his eyes scanning the reinforced library doors. "Report," static crackled back, followed by the frantic voice of the head of security. "It's Lorenzo, boss. He didn't come with his own guys. He hired outside muscle, a rogue hit squad from the Kavak clan out of Astoria. They blew the hinges off the north gate with C4. We have heavy casualties on the lawn." Olivia's blood ran cold. The Kavak clan. She had read about them in a New York Times expose years ago. A ruthless, real-life Balkan syndicate, notorious for acting as untraceable mercenaries for the highest bidder. They didn't care about the commission's rulings. They only cared about cash, and Lorenzo must have promised them the entire vault. "Hold the foyer! Nobody gets up the grand staircase," Dominic yelled. He turned to Olivia, his jaw tight. He reached into the top drawer of Salvatore's desk and pulled out a heavy, silver-engraved Beretta 92 FS. He racked the slide, chambering around, and shoved it into Olivia's trembling hands. "It's a 9mm. Safety is off. Point and pull," Dominic ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I have to choke the hallway to keep them out of this room. Do not leave the cover of this desk. If anyone walks through those double doors who isn't me, you empty the magazine into their chest. Do you understand?" "Dominic, don't leave me," Olivia gasped, her fingers slipping against the cold steel of the gun. He grabbed the back of her neck, pressing his forehead against hers for a fraction of a second. "I will die before I let them touch you, Principessa." With that, Dominic slipped out of the library, the heavy oak doors clicking shut behind him. The next 10 minutes were an agonizing symphony of violence. Olivia huddled beneath the desk, her hands clamped over her ears as the deafening roar of automatic gunfire echoed through the sprawling mansion. She could hear the shattering of priceless antique vases, the heavy thud of bodies hitting the marble floors, and the terrifying, guttural shouts of men fighting for their lives. Suddenly, the gunfire in the immediate hallway ceased. An eerie, heavy silence descended upon the library. Olivia held her breath, raising the heavy Beretta, aiming it squarely at the main double doors. She waited for Dominic to walk back in. Instead, a soft click echoed from the opposite side of the room. Olivia snapped her head around. Behind the towering bookshelves, a concealed door, the old servant's passage that only family members knew about, swung open. Lorenzo Conti stepped into the library. He looked entirely unhinged. His flashy maroon suit was covered in plaster dust and splattered with someone else's blood. He was breathing heavily, a crazed, desperate light in his dark eyes. In his right hand, he held a snub-nosed revolver, aimed directly at the floor where Olivia was hiding. "Did you really think you could lock me out of my own house, waitress?" Lorenzo wheezed, stepping over the threshold. "I grew up playing hide-and-seek in these walls. Dominic is busy bleeding out in the foyer. It's just you and me." Olivia stood up slowly from behind the desk. Her knees were shaking, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but her grip on the silver Beretta was shockingly steady. She leveled the barrel straight at Lorenzo's chest. "The commission warned you." "Lorenzo," Olivia said, her voice dropping into a cold, hollow register she didn't recognize. "If you kill me, Don Lucchese will have you hunted down like a dog." "I'll take my chances in South America," Lorenzo spat, raising his revolver. "You stole my father. You stole my birthright. Now, I'm taking my money back." He tightened his finger on the trigger. Olivia didn't hesitate. She didn't think about the $480 tip, the unpaid medical bills, or the cramped apartment in Queens. She thought about survival. She pulled the trigger. The Beretta bucked violently in her hands. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Lorenzo's eyes widened in profound shock. He looked down at the blooming red stain in the center of his maroon suit. The revolver slipped from his fingers, clattering uselessly to the floor. Without a single word, Lorenzo Conti collapsed backward, his lifeless eyes staring up at the crystal chandelier. The heavy oak doors of the library burst open. Dominic stood in the doorway, bleeding from a fresh cut on his cheek, his suit jacket ruined, his Sig Sauer raised. He took in the scene: Lorenzo dead on the Persian rug, and Olivia standing behind the desk, the smoking Beretta perfectly level in her hands. He slowly lowered his weapon. He walked over to her, his heavy footsteps the only sound in the room. He gently took the gun from her rigid fingers and placed it on the desk. He looked at the blood on the floor, and then he looked at Olivia. The waitress was gone forever. The woman standing before him was forged in fire, baptized in the brutal reality of the underworld. Dominic went down on one knee amidst the shattered glass and ruin of the library. He bowed his head, a gesture of absolute, unbreakable fealty. "The king is dead," Dominic murmured, his deep voice vibrating with dark, undeniable reverence. "Long live the Don." What a wild, terrifying ride. Olivia Jenkins went from a desperate waitress drowning in medical debt to the ruthless billionaire Don of the most dangerous crime syndicate on the East Coast. She proved that a single act of kindness covering a $480 bill can alter the course of your entire life. But survival in the mafia isn't about luck. It's about claiming your power. And Olivia definitely claimed hers tonight. If you loved this story of power, betrayal, and the undeniable, explosive romance between Olivia and her lethal enforcer Dominic, you absolutely need to stick around for more. Please smash that like button, share this video with your friends who love a good mafia drama, and hit subscribe so you never miss out on our thrilling, real-life inspired storytelling. What did you think of Olivia's final decision? Would you have pulled the trigger to save your empire? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next incredible story.